Osio Nagata Tahija. That is hello, how are you, everyone in Cherokee. And I'm a citizen of the Cherokee Nation. I'm from Oklahoma. And like Joanne said, you're going to hear my southern accent as I speak today. I was a domestic violence victim in the late 70s, and at that time, the attitude about domestic violence victims was that that just occurs behind closed doors. No victim advocacy was conducted back then. In the early 80s is when victim services and domestic violence and sexual assault services began. The Office of Victims of Crime OVC was established by the 1984 Victims of Crime Act, the VOCA Act, and to oversee diverse programs that benefit victims of crime and to serve as the federal government's chief advocate for American crime victims. And I want to thank our OVC Director, Joy Frost, for all that she has done. She's been so committed in serving crime victims in so many ways, and especially dedicated for serving crime victims in Indian country. And yes. And the National Crime Victim Rights Week was established in a presidential executive order by President Ronald Reagan in 1981. So that's a little of the history, the background, and things that continue on. And Elton told you a little bit about my background and history and everything, so you know what I am doing that gives me the knowledge about my plenary. But I do want to say that I do serve Cherokee Nation as their tribal attorney. I'm also on their advisory task force for their victim task force, and I'm the chief judge for the Pawnee Nation, but I primarily am the victim training specialist for Unified Solutions Tribal Community Development Group, who's the TNTA provider for OVC tribal victim grantees, and my team is right here. I'm not bragging about telling this, just confirming my knowledge about this topic, which is innovative approaches for enhancing safety, justice, and healing for victims. And the first thing is significant needs for crime victims include victims need help, victims need to feel safe, victims need to express their emotions, and victims need to know what comes next after they're victimized, and victims need to heal. So the first stage of victimization includes an initial reaction, which may include shock, fear, anger, helplessness, disbelief, and guilt. The trauma of victimization is a direct reaction to the aftermath of crimes. Crime victims suffer a tremendous amount of physical and psychological trauma. The primary injuries victims suffer can be grouped into three distinct categories, which could be physical, financial, emotional. And when victims do not receive appropriate support and intervention in the aftermath of crime, they suffer secondary injuries. All this info reflects the needs to enhance safety, justice, and healing for crime victims. So first, I'm going to talk about safety. Safety can include safety planning for crime victims, which is usually conducted by victim advocates. Notice of the status of offenders, such as if they're incarcerated or released from jails. Victims need to know the status when crimes have been charged against the offender, against them. And sometimes it's VINE notification, which is the victim information notification, but also policies can be created by victim advocacy programs so that they know when to notify crime victims on the status of their offenders. Another safety item is establishing safety for crime victims in courts during case hearings when the offender is also there. So tribal courts can establish that, so a victim advocate, prosecutor can have a crime victim one place, law enforcement can have the victims another place so that they're not close together until the hearing occurs, because that stresses out crime victims. And I know that that is different because a lot of times tribal courts don't have a lot of room and space for that, but there's policies and procedures you can establish for that. State courts and federal courts have more room. Mary Jo Speaker is here. She is a victim specialist for the Eastern District of Oklahoma U.S. Attorney, and I know that she coordinates that a lot of ways, and I appreciate what she does. Also, another thing about safety is a lot of times helping victims find new jobs, since domestic violence often impacts finance and incomes for victims. And as I've said, we do lots of training technical assistance for different tribal victim services, and we go on site a lot to see all these programs. Wechoni Wewokia up in South Dakota has a policy where they help crime victims find new places to live, new residences, and even helps them find jobs, so that helps safety when they establish new jobs, new residences, to get them away from where they were assaulted. Safety can also be protective orders and assistance to stop victim stalking, and sometimes victim shelters for crime victims or domestic violence victims and youth victims as well, because if we have a place for them to be temporarily until we can help them get them established for more safety. And each crime victim service group should establish safety and security policies, practices, procedures, and protocols so that you all can establish safety as you serve crime victims. Safety should be enhanced for crime victims with disabilities of all ages, and for other crime victims of all ages, whether you're serving adults, youth victims, or elders. And we're going to see more elders because the 2010 U.S. Census has predicted more elders the next 20 years. And some of those may be baby boomers that were born, but they're predicting, and a lot of tribal victim services are focusing also on elder abuse because they're seeing more elders. And so that's information we should talk about and look at in our programs as well. As to enhancing justice, first of all, holistic justice is an important thing because holistic justice is a way of finding more healthy and sustainable solutions to legal problems. And holistic justice has been discussed in some of the trainings here at the Indian Nations Conference. Thursday there was a training promoting holistic healing. This afternoon there's a promoting traditional and restorative principle to strengthen safety, justice, and healing, and they also reference holistic justice. And also another healing way in justice is healing to wellness courts, which is also holistic justice. And so justice can be two different topics. One would be civil or criminal justice. And in both criminal and civil justice cases, the goal is to hold the defender, or the offender defendant, accountable for what they have done to the victims. So civil justice is just when there are times that victims can file a civil lawsuit against an offender to hold them accountable for other things, maybe damages that they created when they were victimized. And civil justice can include state crime victims compensation, and it is available to tribal victims and tribal victim services. And you should collaborate with your state crime victims compensation so you know the procedures and be able to work with them. Suzanne Breedlove is here from Oklahoma. She has been serving crime victims for several years, about 30 years, for the District Attorney's Council in Oklahoma. She also created a policy that included, for crime victim compensation, that would include cultural activities for crime victims, and that is a very good thing for other states to see as well when they have a lot of tribes in their area. And Suzanne Breedlove is here, and she was also awarded in 2013 for the Crime Victims Services Awards because of this that she created, because that is a good example for us to see about crime victim compensation. Criminal justice is how offenders of victims are held accountable, and also my suggestion is that crime victim policy groups should create procedures or documents for crime victims for their knowledge, because a lot of times crime victims do not understand the procedures of courts, and they need to know how court systems work, because a lot of times crime victims don't want to file charges or wonder about filing charges. And so establish positive relationships with victims and prosecutors by victim advocates and law enforcement. So crime victims know what are arraignments, probable cause and preliminary hearings, trial activities, appeals, and probation hearings. And so that's another suggestion about criminal justice for crime victims to understand, so that they're more encouraged to file charges against the offender, to hold offenders accountable for victimizations that they do. And then the final topic is healing. And healing, Thursday, the Sweetgrass Integrating Cultural Wellness was presented this morning. A circle peacemaking was held, and Thursday also there was healing in the arts. And so this is, healing is cultural, and its cultural awareness is the understanding that helps to how the crimes are impact an individual's perspective and their experience of victimization. Cultural relevance puts cultural knowledge and skill into action, making an individual victim service program relevant to the victim that it serves. Non-tribal service providers who are in urban areas or non-tribal areas should have the ability to reach out to tribal folks and tribal healers so that they know how they can serve the tribal crime victims and to have cultural healing knowledge. And I will recognize the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma because they established an agreement with the State Department of Human Services for serving tribal elders, so that they have cultural ways to help heal and serve tribal victims through DHS, the Department of Human Service. And so that's a great example for what the Choctaw Nation has done. And cultural awareness is the understanding that helps treat crime victims and healing in a number of ways. And so other cultural healing can be healing in the arts and talking circles. And talking circles are more private ways that tribes conduct their healing circles. And so a talking circle, there's a sample. Kaw Nation, which is a OVC grantee, has established a talking circle. Prairie Band Potawatomi Tribe in Kansas has created a tremendous healing in the arts program by Kent Miller and Rebecca Jones, and they're both here at the tribal conference. I don't see where they're sitting, but they are both here. And the Pine Ridge Ogallala Sioux tribe also does star quilts, which is another healing in the arts for crime victims. And the Iowa tribe in Oklahoma does healing in the arts. They have crime victims come, and they have a group that sits around and they make baby moccasins. And as they do that, then they all discuss with each other and the victim service provider how the crime victimization has impacted them. And that's just a way a talking circle works. And sometimes Another thing that I would suggest is there should be establishment of collaboration between victim advocates and medical professionals, so medical professionals understands the types of victimizations. Unified Solutions has done training for different grantees to talk about that, and we've helped them collaborate with their victim services and their medical services group so that they have more understanding to do that. Healing may also be through religious healing if that is the healing option a victim would seek to have. When I was district attorney, I had partnerships with both tribal and religious people to provide personal healing based upon what a victim needed. I had a lot of homicides during my time, and we would have these healers come to crime scenes if families and survivors were there to help them heal a little bit through this tragedy. Also, post-traumatic stress disorder was the first applied to military veterans who experienced psychological trauma while serving in combat. Researchers are now applying this syndrome, post-traumatic stress disorder, which is PTSD. The syndrome is also to crime victims. Being a victim of crime does not necessarily mean that an individual will develop PTSD, but if victims receive appropriate crisis intervention, the chances of developing PTSD are reduced. Some recognizable symptoms of PTSD can include constant flashback, intrusion of thoughts, extreme tension and anxiety, outbursts of anger, prolonged feelings of detachment or estrangement of others, and memory trouble as well. And so PTSD is just another thing. All of these show the need for physical and psychological and emotional healing. And so hopefully discussing innovative approaches to enhancing safety, justice, and healing for victims has been helpful. It is an honor for all of us to serve crime victims. I have seen so many great tribal programs, how creative many are in serving crime victims, such as safety, justice, and healing. And it is truly great experience to always be here at the Indian Nations Conference with great trainings and getting to see friends and colleagues, OVC team and their folks, and grantees we serve. And special thanks to Jerry Gardner and TLPI for all the great things that they do. Thanks to everyone here for your dedication and commitment to serving crime victims. And now we'll have some awards that will be for the Body Heavy Runner Award for all the great work that people do. So in Cherokee, thank you is Wado. So Wado to all of you for all you do. Thank you.